The new Gilded Age. An age that was very gilded. What does gilded mean, you might say? Fuck if I know. Now, the new Gilded Age didn't begin all at once, so it's hard to put a precise time on when exactly it began. But the first traces of the new Gilded Age showed up in 2030, after the economic recession of 2030 led to mass layoffs, as well as many smaller businesses going out of business, paving the way for large-scale corporate monopolies to rise and dominate the economy in later decades. By the 2040s, America was solidly in the new Gilded Age, and most developed nations entered shortly after. The new Gilded Age was a time of economic hardship for the vast majority of the population, while the rich continued to get richer. Loneliness also intensified, with a growing number of people feeling isolated and having no friends. Housing costs had skyrocketed, while wage rises had struggled to keep up. Marriage and dating declined, and large-scale poverty increased, with homeless encampments becoming common in more and more cities across the U.S. Many of the cities had also become neglected and full of garbage, because nobody really cared about anything anymore, I guess. Automation was a rising threat, and many people lived paycheck to paycheck. It wasn't a pleasant time to live, and it was about to get even worse. Guess what? Yep, that's right, it's climate change. I don't think you guessed that, but I'm saying it anyway. To make matters even worse than they already were, climate refugees had become increasingly displaced from their home countries, which had faced increasing droughts, floods, and hurricanes, placing increasing strain on housing in America and Europe when they arrived in those nations. Due to a multitude of zoning restrictions and the time it took to build housing, as well as the fact that more and more refugees were coming in each year, this meant that housing was sometimes being taken up faster than it could be built. As a result, the crisis became even worse. Anti-immigration unrest intensified throughout America and Europe, and left-wing unrest increased in response to it. Protests began in the streets, some of which even turned violent. This rise in populism led to a multitude of government crises, particularly in Germany. Germany had a system of parties called the Firewall, intentionally designed to keep the populist AfD out of power. But the AfD by this point had risen so much that the anti-AfD coalition didn't get enough votes to form a majority coalition, and as a result, Germany's government fell into a state of deadlock. None of the major German parties were willing to cooperate with the AfD, which by now was by far the largest German party, and thus the deadlock continued. Meanwhile, in the good old USA, the Democrats had won the 2036 election, and the 2040 election, and the 2044 election. That's a lot of elections, but their perceived softness on immigration led them to lose in 2048. Who did they lose to, you ask? The dark horse anti-immigration populist candidate Oliver Grant won by a surprising margin in the 2048 election after the Democrats had grown increasingly unpopular. In response to this, Antifa, which had become a much larger force in the 2040s due to a massive rise in political radicalism, organized many protests, some of which were peaceful. It's important to note, however, that the US didn't fall into a civil war, because even though there was mass support for radicalism, the military didn't split and remained apolitical. As a result, the radicalism was mostly in the streets and didn't come anywhere near the capital. Except that one time it did. Actually, there were a couple of times that it did. My point is, it didn't lead to a collapse. Meanwhile, back in Germany, the homeland of germs, the mainstream parties were forced to form a coalition with the socialist party known as Die Linke. While this move would be unpopular and fucking suck, siding with the AfD would be even more unpopular and would suck about 10 times as hard. As a result, by forging... How the fuck do you say that? Okay, forging a coalition with Die Linke... I gotta cut that out at some point. The Firewall was able to temporarily save itself, but only after making itself even more unpopular than it already was, and making the AfD even more popular. So that happened. Anyways, the climate crisis also caused a severe series of droughts and famines in Iran, which eventually caused them to have a civil war. This civil war in Iran would make the refugee crisis far, far worse. I might make a video about it at some point, but I won't. Good riddance. Adieu.